Alright, so this video is going to cover Objective 3 from Chapter 6, the structure of bone. And we're going to look at kind of gross anatomy and microscopic anatomy. And so we're going to start with the gross anatomy of a long bone. And just FYI, in your lecture packet, you do have a diagram of this bone to label. And there is also a Moodle activity involved with this bone labeling as well. And so the gross anatomy, remember, is just what you can see with the naked eye. And so we're going to start with the long bone. And so here we have a couple of terms, and hopefully the prefixes will help you out with those. So first we have the periosteum, and then we have the endosteum. Now peri means kind of around or surrounding. So this is going to be a very tough fibrous membrane on the outside of the bone. So you can kind of see it's all of this area right here. You can pretty much find it everywhere except for where you see this articular cartilage. And so this is where your tendons and your ligaments are going to attach to the bone. It does contain nerve and blood vessels, and that's going to make sure the bone has a constant supply of nutrients and oxygen, and waste are going to be removed. And then we have the endosteum, and so this is going to be a thinner membrane. It's on the inside of the medullary cavity. And so inside the bone is kind of a space. And so the endosteum is going to be the lining on the inside of that space. And so this is where we're going to see bone growth, we're going to see repair, and we're going to see remodeling. All right, the shaft of the bone is known as the diaphysis. Okay, that's this long region here. It's kind of the long cylinder of the bone. And this is going to be composed of compact bone on the outside, on the walls. And then the inside is going to be that medullary cavity. And that's where you're going to find the yellow marrow, which kind of contains the fat in the bone. On the ends, we have what are called the epiphyses. Okay, singular is epiphysis. And this is going to be the wider regions at the end. This is where you're going to find mostly a lot of your red marrow. And where the diaphysis and the epiphysis meet, we have what's called the epiphyseal plate, or the epiphyseal line. Now the difference is, it depends on what your age is and where you are in your bone development. So the epiphyseal plate is what we commonly refer to as our growth plates. You may have heard this if you've ever broken a bone. The doctors may check to make sure it's not in the growth plate. But the epiphyseal plate is actually a little layer of hyaline cartilage, and that's where the bone growth is going to occur. It allows our bones to grow longer. Now, as we age, eventually we don't keep getting taller and taller, and that cartilage is going to be replaced by bone, and at that point, that's when we call it the epiphyseal line. So that just depends on the stage of development. And then articular cartilage is what you will find at the ends of the epiphyses, okay, and that is where the bones are going to articulate, or they're going to join up with other bones in joints. And so the cartilage is going to reduce friction, so those joints move more easily. And they're also going to act as a shock absorber. All right, so once again, don't forget about the labeling activity and then the paper in your packet. Now, flat bones are a little bit different, okay, not quite as complicated. Essentially, you've got spongy bone in the inside, and it's kind of sandwiched in between two layers of compact bone. And so remember that a lot of your flat bones are going to be protecting, like in your skull. And so this is kind of the type of structure that you have here. You've got compact on either side and spongy in the middle. All right, so the shaft of the bone between the distal and proximal ends is the diaphysis. And the connective tissue membrane that lines the inside, this is the key. The inside would be the endosteum. Which type of bone has spongy bone sandwiched between two layers? The sandwiching is what you will find in a flat bone. All right, so more about the structure of the bone. So now we're going to kind of get more to the microscopic anatomy, and we're going to take a look at the different types of cells and the extracellular matrix. And so there's going to be 4 different types of cells. We're going to take a look at those in a minute. There's actually not tons of cells in your bone tissue because the majority of it is going to be this extracellular matrix. And remember, that's the stuff that's on the outside of the cells. That's kind of essentially what determines the type of connective tissue that it is. And so in bone extracellular matrix, there's going to be collagen fibers, It's just a type of protein fiber, and then there's going to be all different types of minerals. So let's first take a look at the different types of cells. Okay, now notice they all start with osteo, and osteo is that prefix that means bone. All right, and then we have some other terms here like genic, refers to genesis, which means the beginning. You've got blast, which means bud or build. You've got cytes, which just means cells. And you've got clast, which means to break down. I like to think of that as clashing, and clashing and breaking kind of go together. Because you've got osteoblasts that build and you've got osteoclasts that break. So you're going to see these terms all throughout the rest of the lesson. And so osteogenic cells are actually your stem cells. Remember that your bones come from the mesenchyme, which is in the mesoderm, the embryonic tissue layer. Your mesenchymal cells are going to form all of your connective tissues. And so specifically, your bone is going to come from your osteogenic cells. And these are the ones that are going to become the osteoblast. And you can find these osteogenic cells in the deep layers of the periosteum and in the bone marrow. And these are the only ones that are actually going through the cell cycle and dividing by mitosis. Now, the osteogenic cells are going to become the osteoblasts, and these are what are actually going to build bone. They're going to form the bone matrix. Now, they're found in the growing portions of bone. Now, what's going to happen is your osteoblasts are going to get trapped in the bone matrix. And when they get trapped in the bone matrix, they're going to mature into cells called osteocytes. And so osteocytes are just essentially mature bone cells. So where the osteoblasts are making the bone matrix, the osteocytes are maintaining the matrix. So they're not actively dividing or anything like that. They're actually stuck within the bone matrix in these little tiny spaces called lacunae. And we're going to see that again here in a little bit. And then finally you have your osteoclasts. Now, your osteoblasts and your osteocytes are both coming from these osteogenic cells. These osteoclasts are actually coming from immune cells, which are types of white blood cells. And what they do is they break down the bone in a process called bone resorption. And so we're going to see this in order for bones to grow and be remodeled, or if you have an injured bone, you're going to see the work of osteoclasts. In fact, the osteoblasts and osteoclasts are often kind of working together. Even though they have the opposite effect, a lot of times they're both involved in the bone remodeling processes. All right, so once again, there you have your 4 different types of bone cells. So your osteogenic or your precursors, they're going to be your stem cells. They are going to produce your osteoblast, which will mature into your osteocytes. And then your osteoclasts are going to be a bone breaker type of cell. All right, now the matrix itself, this is one of the things that's unique to bone. Bone is quite different from a lot of other tissues in that it is very hard, and that has to do with that extracellular matrix. So there's actually not that many cells in the bone matrix. It's mostly going to be collagen fibers, which are going to give bones their flexibility. Remember, these are a type of protein fiber. And then collagen fibers are going to kind of act as an attachment site for lots of like salts or minerals to attach to. So not only do they provide flexibility, but they're essentially an attachment site for all of these salt crystals, especially like calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate. Now these two are going to join up to form something called hydroxyapatite, and that's what's going to kind of pull in and collect other salts. And so essentially you get all of these crystals, you get this mineralization that is happening on these collagen fibers, and that's what's going to make their bones hard, and it's going to give them lots of strength. So bones are pretty unique in that not only are they hard and strong, but they're also flexible. And that goes back to the components in their bone matrix. So just a quick little, an example of a disease. Every once in a while we like to talk about what happens when things are not going well or homeostasis is not maintained. And this is one of the possibilities on your bonus. But osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bone disease, essentially this is where, due to mutations, the person can't make collagen like they need to. And so the collagen is what gives your bones their flexibility. And so what happens is they have brittle bone disease. They break very easily. And you can see there's a variety of symptoms, and you can see that that skeleton is not going to develop properly. All right, so the extracellular matrix is made up of which of the following? All right, now organic, this was mentioned, just what they were is mentioned in the lesson, but organic, remember that's when you have carbon bonded to hydrogen, and all of our macromolecules were organic. Our carbs, our lipids, our proteins, nucleic acids. Inorganic is what you're going to find like in your non-living types of molecules. They might contain carbon, but they don't have these carbon skeletons, these carbon chains, these carbon backbones. So inorganic are just going to be just simple elements or salts, things of that nature. So collagen is actually organic, okay? So that's why this one's wrong. Collagen is an organic protein. Minerals are inorganic. They're not living. They don't necessarily have the carbon-hydrogen backbone structure. And so the best answer here is going to be B. Okay, it could say organic collagen, or it could say inorganic minerals. All right, so a little bit more about the structure of bone. We're about to get into the histology, or the insides of the bone tissue. And so hopefully we know already, just from what we've done in lab and maybe even learned about tissues, we know that there's two main types of bone. You have compact bone and spongy bone. There's some other names for them, but either one is acceptable. And so really how much you have and where you find these bone types or bone tissue types is going to depend on the bone itself and what that bone is doing. But compact bone is going to be denser and stronger. This is what's going to help provide support and protection and withstand compression, whereas spongy bone has these big open spaces. And so that's going to help reduce the weight of our bones and make it easier to move and make our skeleton lighter overall. Also in the spongy bone is where you can find the marrow, where you find hematopoiesis taking place. And so we're going to take a look at the histology of the compact bone. And so here you have kind of a list of the definitions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the picture and just kind of explain it through the picture. So you have the basic unit in a bone called an osteon. And if you remember bone under the microscope, it kind of looks like tree rings. So each set of these concentric rings is called an osteon. So that's kind of a microscopic unit of compact bone. And you can see the same thing up here. There's one osteon. Now in the very center of the osteon, you have what's called the central canal, or the Haversian canal. And that's where you're going to find blood vessels and lymph vessels and nerves coming through. And so each osteon is made of these concentric rings. And these rings are called lamellae. If it's just one, it's a lamella. If it's more than one, it's lamellae. And so in between, where these lamellae rings kind of form around each other, you see these little tiny spaces called lacunae, and that's where you're going to find your little osteocytes, those mature bone cells that are maintaining the matrix. And so obviously we want blood supply to get all the way around the bone. And so you have, in addition to the central canals, we also have these canals that run perpendicular called the perforating canals, or the Volkmann's canals. And they're going to help bring the blood all the way from the periosteum into the bone, all the way to the inside. And then lastly, we're going to have some little tiny kind of like radiations from those lacunae. They're going to be little tiny channels called canaliculi, and they're going to help carry blood vessels and things all the way into those little spaces, into those osteocytes. All right, spongy bone is a little bit simpler. Okay, we still have osteocytes that are housed in the lacunae, but instead of those lamellae, those concentric rings, we have trabeculi. And so what happens is we have a lattice-like structure of these matrix spikes. And although it seems kind of random, like they're just randomly formed, it's actually based on stress. They're going to form where the bone needs them to be. And so these trabeculi are going to be kind of the stronger portion of your spongy bone, and then the rest of it's going to be spaces that are going to contain that marrow, that red marrow. All right, so match the parts with their function. Oops, sorry about that. All right, so the lattice-like network of spikes. Spikes were your trabeculi, small channels that transmit blood vessels from the periosteum into bone. That's going to be your Volkmann's canals. The spaces that contain the cells are your lacunae. The whole microscopic unit is going to be your osteon. And the little structures that connect the lacunae with that central canal are going to be your canaliculi. All right, we're going to stop there for Objective 3, and we'll carry on with Objective 4 in the next video.